Hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Go grab yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee. Today I have a new bookish video. We're already more than a week into July, so I know I'm a little late with my June reading wrap up, but hey, that just means I have even more books to tell you guys about. This first one will sound familiar if you caught my summer reading recommendations video that I did a couple weeks ago. I was sharing some of my favorite adventure stories, which I think are so good for summer reading. One of the authors I mentioned was William J. Locke, who wrote The Beloved Vagabond. The Scarlet Pimpernel was another book I mentioned in that video. The Beloved Vagabond by William J. Locke is so good, but I actually read another book by William J. Locke this month that I'd never tried before. It was called The Town of Tombarel. It's set in Provence, up in this tiny little village in the Alps. I don't know why, but my reading choices lately have been leading me to Provence. Is this a sign that I need to go to Provence? Probably. The other book or series that I've been reading is Perfume from Provence by Lady Winifred Fortescue, which I love so much. And this was fun because the setting and the characters are really similar because it's like the same, region of France and like very similar people, but a little bit of a different flavor. The Town of Tombarel was definitely a little bit darker, lots of murder and intrigue and romance. Tombarel is the mayor of this little French town, and there's a English painter who gets to know him and really comes to appreciate him. So it's told kind of third person from the painter's perspective. Really interesting, sometimes very dramatic stories and vignettes and just beautiful writing. I did mark a passage. It was a still April afternoon, one of the days which we inhabitants of the Côte d'Azur call specifically a blue day. One of the days whose unspeakable gold and azure beauty gives you an ache in the heart. It is true, said Max Cadole, to whom I was clumsily expressing myself. It is regret. It is beauty more than one can bear. It is the nostalgia of immortality. I would highly recommend Town of Tombarel. I picked it up as an ebook. I'll leave it linked down below, as usual, along with all the rest of the books. Another book with really amazing writing I read this month was The Poet and the Lunatics. So this is by G.K. Chesterton. It is a mystery, kind of like murder mystery, like the Father Brown series. That's about a priest who solves mysteries, and this is about a poet, a lunatic, one or the other, who solves mysteries. I didn't expect to love it quite as much as I did. I liked how each chapter was kind of its own vignette, but then they all did kind of tie together. There were just some really interesting observations about like what we think of as crazy and like how crazy is it really, and like what is reasonable and rational. The main character is Gabriel Gale, who is a painter and a poet, but at the same time you're always wondering, is he a lunatic? And there are lunatics that he's dealing with. I don't want to give anything away, but my one and only complaint is that the girl we see in the first chapter, Diana, I'm pretty sure is her name, I wish we'd seen like way more. Like I wish Harriet Vane, I feel like she could be like a Harriet Vane and we could see her solving mysteries and follow her adventures, but we follow Gabriel Gale instead. So I don't think he wrote any more Gabriel Gale mysteries, but I'll have to look that up. One of the books I mentioned enjoying last month was a reread of The Four Graces by D.E. Stevenson, and I mentioned that technically, kind of sort of, this is like a sequel to Miss Bunkle's book because you see some of the characters from Miss Bunkle's, series in the beginning, although the story then really turns and focuses on an entirely new set of story, the Graces, these four daughters. But reading that made me realize it's been far too long since I reread Miss Bunkle's book and its attendant sequels. Miss Bunkle is a middle-aged spinster living in a tiny town in England. No one really expects much of her or thinks that she's all that smart or all that bright, but unknown to all of the inhabitants of the village, she writes a book about them because she says that she can only write what she knows, and she writes it extremely well, and her book ends up taking off and the villagers all recognize themselves and are trying to figure out, okay, who wrote this book? The plot is just really fun. It's such a fun concept, but the characters are what really make it. Miss Bunkle herself is so charming. It's so fun, like when she goes to London to meet her publisher and like she ends up buying new clothes and like she kind of enters into this persona of Elizabeth Wade, who is her sort of alter ego in the book, and it's just so charming. I love D.E. Stevenson because it's like charming and cozy, but then also beautifully written, and there are things that like make you stop and laugh out loud. There are things that make you stop and think. So D.E. Stevenson obviously didn't care too much about spoilers because the title of the second book in the series is a spoiler. Like, you can't help spoiling it because it's in the title. I'm about to tell you the title, so you've been warned. Miss Bunkle Married is the second book. She does leave her village because all the villagers are kind of after her when they realize that she's the one who caricatured them all. I love the Persephone Books editions, but these ones are kind of fun too. This is by Sourcebooks Landmark, it says on the back. This illustrator actually illustrated a whole bunch of reprints of D.E. Stevenson's works. And they're very pretty and elegant and retro. I do like them. It is kind of funny though, because especially the way Miss Bunkle is described in the first book, she's like a little bit frumpy and like this elegant lady, it like almost doesn't match with the character. But then again, maybe it's Elizabeth Wade, so I think it all works out. And then there is another sequel to this, which is The Two Mrs. Abbotts. So that one also is so fantastic. In each one, there are new, like, amazing characters, and I feel like D.E. Stevenson, like, became attached to one of the new characters and was like, I should finish this character's story. Like, in the first one, Miss Bunkle's book, Sam Abbott is the nephew of the publisher, and he actually is the one who first reads Miss Bunkle's book when she sends it to publishers, and he suggests it get printed, and he doesn't have much else to do with the first book, Miss Bunkle's book, but D.E. Stevenson picks him up and he has a lot to do with the second books. And I feel like I love that she did that. Like, she didn't just leave these like charming new characters she created. She went on and told you their story. If you've never picked up D.E. Stevenson or met Miss Bunkle, you definitely need to fix that. So Penguin English Library has released some new paperbacks recently, and I did go out and buy some because they looked so charming. I got Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I feel like I haven't read enough Charles Dickens, and I'm not sure I've ever read Oliver Twist, so I thought this would be a fun one. And this, which has such a lovely cover, it's actually very slim. I didn't realize it was so short. It's called Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim. I feel like I've heard this title so many times in different books that I love, and like those authors or those characters loved this book, so I have pretty high expectations. And we all know high expectations can be really dangerous, so I'm trying to level it out, but I'm really excited to check it out. I was sick earlier this month, and as we all know, there's only one thing to do when you are sick on the couch all day, and that is watch Pride and Prejudice from start to finish. I watched the A&E version. I always think of it as the A&E version. I guess I must have watched it on A&E initially, but I guess it could also be the BBC version. It's the one with Jennifer L. and Colin Firth, probably the famous one. See, I never think of it as the BBC version because there's another BBC version that was made in the 80s that is also really good, and I kind of, after I finished the, Colin Firth version, kind of wanted to go and watch that one, but by that point I was getting better, so the next time I'm sick, I'm watching the other, 8-hour Pride and Prejudice. But those two adaptations are just so good, and they're like in conversation with the book. I love how they really stay true to the book, but like in some cases they kind of elaborate or fill in things that we're missing, or sometimes like when they don't have a scene from the book, like there's some like little hint that like makes you remember the line from the book, or at least makes me remember it. So whenever I watch the movie, I always end up picking up the book again because I'm like, oh, I want to reread it. I probably do end up rereading Pride and Prejudice like about once a year, but it never gets old. Really, I shouldn't be rereading my old favorites because this book has been lingering in my reading wrap-ups for like 3 months, and I'm still only like 300 pages into it, and it's 700 pages, so I still got a ways to go. It's Demons by Dostoevsky. This is also often translated as The Possessed. This translation is by Richard Pevear and Larissa Volokonsky. My brother Porthos loves Russian literature. In fact, he was saying this should have been on my adventure summer reading recommendations video, and I was like, it isn't that adventurous. At least the first 300 pages. Not a lot has happened yet, but Porthos promised that it's about to pick up quite a lot, he said. So now I'm kind of excited to get back into it. Russian novels and Dostoevsky, like, it is always a very slow build, and you do get to really know the characters a lot. Here's one favorite quotation I copied out. Varvara Petrovna was of a direct and proudly open character, a swooping character, if I may say so. Least of all could she endure secret, lurking accusations. She always preferred open war. Another big reason I did not finish Demons is because I did finish Green Dolphin Street by Elizabeth Goudge. I adore Elizabeth Goudge. She is second only to Jane Austen. Jane Austen, Elizabeth Goudge, and P.G. Wodehouse are up there, my top 3. And it's hard to even like really rank them because I love them for such different reasons, and like in their own way, they're each the best. And Elizabeth Goudge, oh gosh guys, Elizabeth Goudge wrote The Little White Horse, which is such a charming children's book. Green Dolphin Street, I think, is probably her other most famous work. It was very famous in her time and was even made into a movie, I think, in the 40s or 50s. I have to look this up because I now want to watch the movie for sure. I've talked about Elizabeth Goudge in my videos before. I'll have to link my Elizabeth Goudge chat up above if you want to check it out. I love how she writes about like the inner life as well as the outer life. Like the inner life is just as real to her. Like her spiritual life and the prayer life are so important to her plots, to her characters. I think her writing is just beautiful, but it can sometimes be very dense. When I first tried to read Green Dolphin Street, I hadn't read a whole lot of Elizabeth Goudge, and I just found it very hard to get into, and I ended up giving up after just a couple of chapters. But since then, I feel like I've gotten more into Elizabeth Goudge's rhythm, and I've read some very dense books by her. The Child from the Sea was a lovely book, but that was probably one of her most dense books that I've read so far. It was interesting coming back to Green Dolphin Street. I got through those first couple chapters much more easily, and then after that I found it really picked up and like the action really moved along. Sometimes in a book the author like lingers on one scene for a little bit too long. In The Child from the Sea I felt a little bit like that happened. Like she just took too long on one scene when, you know, we were already emotionally exhausted by that scene. It was like, can we move along? But I thought the pacing in Green Dolphin Street was just excellent. Like really interesting, often action-packed scene that like ended almost before you were ready for it to end, but I think that is the best way an author can do it, like to just leave you wanting a little bit more. This is one of those books that's really impossible to talk about without spoiling the plot, so if you want to come into the plot totally fresh and not knowing, you know, anything about it, then you're going to want to skip ahead until I'm holding up a new book. I don't think Elizabeth Goudge really meant for like the big plot twist to be a surprise because she kind of spoils it. Like she's constantly dropping hints about it all through the beginning. This book is about two sisters, Marguerite and Mary Ann. They grow up on Green Dolphin Street, and across the way lives a little boy named William. They both fall in love with William, and this book spans like 60 years actually, kind of most of their lives. They grow up and William and Marguerite are very much in love, but Mary Ann, of course, loves William and is hoping that she can win him. William ends up in New Zealand and is basically a pioneer out there. This is set, I think, like in the 1800s. You do hear them talking about like sailing ships and like the advent of steam, and Mary Ann is so interested in like locomotives and trains and steam and all these new inventions. Anyway, we hear from the beginning that William is very forgetful about names, and he's very like sort of mostly relaxed and chill and kind of go with the flow, which is why he didn't propose to Marguerite before he left. In New Zealand, he decides to write back to the sisters and ask for his true love to come visit him, but he writes the wrong name. He writes Mary Ann when he meant Marguerite. Mary Ann is of course overjoyed and goes to New Zealand, and when William sees her, he just doesn't have the heart to send her back, so he marries her. And I think the description of their married life and how William really in a way redeems Mary Ann, because she's a very prickly person. In a lot of ways I respect and relate to Mary Ann, but she would be an extremely difficult person to live with. But William makes that sacrifice for her, and I think that theme of sacrifice Elizabeth Goudge does better than anybody else. Those little things you do that don't seem to matter, Elizabeth Goudge shows you how they matter more than absolutely anything else. The way she deals with prayer in this book particularly is just absolutely beautiful. With prayer, you usually don't get to see, like with your own eyes or with your own experience, like the results of your prayer. Sometimes you do, but other times, you know, you just kind of put it out there on faith. You pray for someone or something that you want, and sometimes it turns out, sometimes it doesn't. Or maybe you're praying for a person that you haven't seen in years and may never see again, and so you never even know if it helped them out or not. But in Green Dolphin Street, Elizabeth Goudge shows you the results of the prayer, that maybe the character who's praying doesn't get to see them, but you see them, and they're actually kind of major parts of the plot. Yeah, I just honestly, every time I read an Elizabeth Goudge novel, I love her more and more. And she's one of those authors where when you read her novel, you feel like you're not quite the same. You know, you feel like you walk away different. Not just with a new perspective, but just something kind of deep inside has clicked that hadn't clicked before. As Elizabeth Goudge herself knows, who knows how long that feeling will last, but it definitely makes for reading her books such a beautiful and uplifting experience. I would highly, highly recommend Green Dolphin Street. The locations, too. She paints so just gorgeously. There's a ship The Green Dolphin is not only a street, but a ship, and it's a country. And of course, New Zealand, the way she describes that is so vivid and incredible. And the island that they grow up on, oh my gosh, I think it's St. Pierre. I kept meaning to look up and see, like, is this an actual place? I mean, Elizabeth Goodge's books are, I believe, often set kind of in actual places, but she often gives them different names, like Torminster is, I think, oh, is that Ely or is that Wells? I think it's Wells, but then Ely, the cathedral city of Ely is like the basis for, I think it's the city in Dean's Watch. So I need to look up and see like what island, what area did she have in mind for this. It's kind of impossible to pick just one quotation to read. But this one I feel like is especially appropriate because it's related to the Green Dolphin and the title. Yes, they were her favorite color, elfin green, the green of a curving wave on a gray day, undismayed though the sky is clouded. A brave color. Not the sort of exciting brave color that scarlet is, flashing and flaming and soon burned out, but cool and keen and quiet, the color that even in midwinter is never quite banished from the earth, and that shows first through the melting snow, the best and most tenacious color in the whole world. Well, that was kind of a long one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, though. I'd love to hear what you're reading, if you've read any of these books and what you think of them. Don't forget to post your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I post new videos every single week. I hope you're having a magical day, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Stay bookish!